die Zukunft. Manchmal scheint es, als ob die Zukunft weit weg von hier entfernt ist. Aber manchmal kann die Zukunft eine große Überraschung sein. Was erwartet uns in der Zukunft? Niemand kann das wissen. Lass uns in die Zukunft fahren. Das hier ist Lernen und Fahren. Part 3 of a 3-part series on tense in the German language. If you have not watched the previous 2 videos in this series, I strongly recommend you pause this one, go back and watch the first 2, that's episode 9 and episode 10, because not only did we cover the past and present tenses in the German language, but we also covered some other concepts that are very important to understand, concepts that we will be building on in this video. So, in this video, we are going to cover the future tenses in English and German and how they contrast and compare. We will also, to wrap up the video, do a quick summary of everything that we've learned from these 3 videos. So let's look to the future. How do we express the future tense in the English language? Well, it turns out we've got a bunch of options for expressing future tense in the English language. We've got the simple future tense. I will play with the dog. We've got the future progressive tense. I will be playing with the dog. We've got the future perfect tense. I will have played with the dog. And we've got the future perfect progressive tense. I will have been playing with the dog. Some linguists also count the is going to construct as its own tense in the English language. That is, I am going to play with the dog. But because that tense is semantically identical to the simple future tense, i.e. there is no difference in meaning between I will play with the dog and I'm going to play with the dog, I'm going to ignore that one, because the is going to construct doesn't exist in German anyway. So, let's go through these one by one. The equivalents in German, by the way, are Futur I und Futur II. Why did they number the names of the tenses in the future, but not for the present or past? I really don't know. I don't get the German naming convention when it comes to tenses, but let's just go with it. Futur I maps to the simple future tense in English, and Futur II maps to the future perfect tense in English. You'll notice again that there is no equivalent, or no direct equivalent of the English progressive or continuous tenses, but we'll talk about that later. Alright, let's go through each one. So, let's start with the simple future tense in English. The simple future tense in English is a little bit wonky. What do I mean by that? Well, it turns out there's no inflection that our verbs can undergo to express their meaning in the future. If you compare this to, say, the past tense, if you look at a verb in English, let's say play. I play with the dog. If I want to express that in the past tense, I can change the verb play. I can just add an ed to it. I played with the dog, and now that sentence is in the past tense. Even irregular verbs can do this. I run. If I want to express that in the past tense, I change the spelling and pronunciation of the verb run to ran. I ran is now past tense. Notice that you don't have to add any words to those sentences. You don't have to delete any words from those sentences. You just change the verb and it goes from present tense to past tense. That's kind of nice. But what if I want to express them in the future tense? There's no inflection I can do to the verb itself to change it to future tense. If you compare this to other languages, like let's say French, if you see a verb in French that ends with ra, that's a dead giveaway that it's a future tense conjugation. Tu trouver, you find. Tu trouveras, you will find. That's 2 words in French, but we need 3 words to express that in English. Why? Well, it turns out we have to add a word to the sentence to express future tense. That word is called a helper verb. In English, that word is will. The main verb stays in simple present tense, but the addition of the word will changes it. It modifies it to be in future tense. So I will play with the dog. I will talk with the cat. I will build the house. Great, but why do we do that? Why don't we have an inflection for future tense for our verbs? And what is with this helper verb? Where did that come from? Well, I've said this a few times so far in this series. I'm going to say it one more time. If you trace the ancestry of the English language back far enough, you will find that it is technically a Germanic language, and there's a bunch of stuff that we inherited from Old German, including this. The simple future tense, Futur I, in German should look very familiar to you because they do the same thing we do, or rather, we do the same thing that they do. The helper verb in German is werden. And werden serves the same purpose in a German future tense sentence as the word will does in an English future tense sentence. So for example, I play with the dog, present tense. Ich spiele mit dem Hund. If I want to express that in future tense, in English I have to add will to the sentence. I will play with the dog. In German we have to add werden. But there's a couple of catches. Number one, we have to conjugate werden to match the person in which we're speaking. And number two, it has an effect on the word order, which we covered in episode 8, the one on subordinate sentence clauses. So, I will play with the dog. Ich werde mit dem Hund spielen. We notice two things. Number one, we have to conjugate werden to werde to match first person singular. And number two, the verb spiele got pushed to the end of the sentence clause and conjugated back to the full infinitive. If this is confusing, please go and watch Ausflug11 because we covered that in great detail. So, ich werde mit dem Hund spielen. The word order is a bit odd compared to English, but the concept is the same. We're using a helper verb to modify the main verb to be in future tense. Now the nice thing about that is that we don't have to care about irregular verbs in the simple future tense in German. In fact, there's effectively no such thing as irregular verbs in Futur I. Why? How's that possible? Well, think about it. If the helper verb werden always pushes the main verb, the verb being modified, to the end of the sentence clause and conjugates it back to the full infinitive, then we don't have to care about the conjugation of that verb. It's predictable always. Take the most irregular verb in the German language. Let's say sein, to be. I am, you are, they are. Ich bin, du bist, sie sind. There's no pattern there. You just have to memorize the entire conjugation table of that irregular verb, which is a pain. But in Futur I, we no longer have to care about that. I will be. Ich werde sein. You will be. Du wirst sein. They will be. Sie werden sein. The verb sein, even though it's irregular, it effectively becomes regular in Futur I because it's always expressed in the infinitive, which is nice. It makes it really easy to remember. Now the catch is, yes, you still have to conjugate the verb werden, but werden is a perfectly regular verb and it follows the normal conjugational pattern. Now let's talk about a usage difference between the English simple future tense and the German simple future tense. The German simple future tense, Futur I, isn't actually used as much as you might expect it to be used. And if that sounds familiar, think back to episode 9 when we talked about the simple past tense in German. Yes, German has a simple past tense called Präteritum, which it turns out is almost never used in the spoken language. Why? Because the Germans prefer to use the present perfect tense to express those past events. Ich habe mit dem Hund gespielt instead of ich spielte mit dem Hund. Something similar happens, to a lesser extent, in the simple future tense in German, in that there's another way to express future tense that doesn't use Futur I or Futur II, and that is to use the simple present tense with a time specifier. So for example, if I wanted to say, I will call you tomorrow, to call someone in German is anrufen, and it's a separable verb prefix. So you can express that in Futur I the same way you'd express it in English. I will call you tomorrow. Ich werde dich morgen anrufen. The word order is a bit different, as we covered, but the concept is exactly the same. That's pretty much how you'd express it in English. But there's another way to say that in German, and that is to use simple present tense with a time specifier. Ich rufe dich morgen an. That is literally, I call you, present tense, tomorrow. It's the word tomorrow that modifies that sentence to be in future tense, technically. Now, if the separable verb prefix has confused you a little bit there, then I refer you back to episode 7, where that entire episode is about separable verb prefixes and how they work. So, ich rufe dich morgen an can substitute for ich werde dich morgen anrufen. They mean the same thing, it's just a style change. And it turns out there's a fun little game you could play if you're speaking with a German person who's maybe struggling just a little bit with English. You might catch them occasionally making this mistake. They'll say something like, I call you later, or I do it tomorrow, instead of I will call you later, or I'm going to do it tomorrow. Why do they say it that way? Because they're thinking in German and they're translating in their head into English. And when you catch them making that mistake, you can gently correct them and say, no, you're supposed to use simple future tense there. I will call you tomorrow, I'm going to do it tomorrow. And I'll take a brief sidetrack here to mention that this is one of the reasons why it's really great to have a conversational partner. If you speak English natively and you're trying to learn German, it's great to link up with someone who speaks German natively and is trying to learn English. And bonus points if you're at roughly the same skill level in your respective target languages. Why? Because you can gently correct each other when you make little mistakes. They can help you learn German and you can help them learn English at the same time. And it feels good to gently correct someone when they make a mistake in English, not in an in-your-face kind of way, like, ha, you got that wrong. But I mean, like, it's gratifying to know that German people struggle with the English language in some of the same ways that we struggle with the German language. This is a universal phenomenon, and it's okay to make little mistakes like that. Everybody does it. In fact, this is one of the best ways you can learn, is to say something wrong and have somebody say, oh, no, you're supposed to say it this other way, and they show it to you. And it helps it stick in your head. And the next time you go to say something like that, you don't make that same mistake again. You get a little bit better every time. Now, if you can't find a conversational partner, there are websites you can use. Conversation Exchange is a good one. There are apps you can use. Hello Talk. You can find people in German-speaking countries who want to practice their English, and they might be willing at the same time to help you practice your German, and you can learn much more rapidly that way. Okay, back to the main track. Let's move to the next tense in English. That is the future perfect tense. I will have played with the dog. If you think back 2 episodes ago when we talked about the past perfect tense in English, the Plusquamperfekt in German, we mentioned that it's usually used when you have 2 events that both happened in the past, but one happened before the other, and you want to express that. Similar thing here in the future tense, but in the opposite direction in time. You've got 2 things that are going to happen in the future, and you want to express that one is before the other. Future perfect tense can be used for that purpose, and it maps very nicely to the German Futur I. So, when you arrive, I will have played with the dog. I'm talking about 2 things that are going to happen. Number 1, I'm going to play with the dog. And number 2, you're going to arrive. And they're going to happen in that order. By the time you arrive, I will already have played with the dog. It'll be over. So, we can express that in English with the future perfect tense. When you arrive, I will have played with the dog. That construct exists in German as Futur I. Wenn du ankommst, werde ich mit dem Hund gespielt haben. You will recognize gespielt as the Partizip II form of the verb spielen. If you don't recognize gespielt, I strongly recommend you go review Ausflug11 because we covered that in great detail. And Partizip II is very important in the German language. Now, there is a catch with the German future perfect tense. And we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but let's revisit it here because it applies to all of the perfect tenses in German. The auxiliary verb in German is not always haben, to have. Sometimes it's sein, to be, which we don't do in English, and it seems very strange. The rule, once again, is that if the main verb, the verb that you're modifying, is a verb of motion, a verb of coming or going, or a verb of existence, to be or to exist, then the auxiliary verb is not haben, to have. Instead, it is sein, to be. For example, if I want to say I will have arrived, you're tempted to say in German, ich werde angekommen haben, because that's how you would say it in English, adjusting for the word order. I will have arrived. But we've got a problem here, because ankommen, to arrive, is a verb of motion. We're coming, we're arriving. So you have to use sein as the auxiliary. Ich werde angekommen sein. That is literally, I will be arrived, which doesn't work in English, but that is how they express that in German. And you can't translate some sentences literally. You have to translate the meaning. You have to change the construct that you're using when you translate because it's different across languages. This is one such example. Ich werde angekommen sein translates to English as I will have arrived, even though that's not literally what you said in German. It does express the same meaning though. All right, let's look at the progressive tenses in English. These don't literally exist in German. But as we've seen in the previous 2 episodes, there's usually ways to express the same meaning, or at least get close to it. For example, the future progressive tense in English. I will be playing with the dog. You can't literally express be playing with in German because that tense doesn't exist. You can get close to it with Futur I. You can say, ich werde mit dem Hund spielen. That is literally, I will play with the dog. But that doesn't really express what I said there. For example, when you arrive, I will be playing with the dog. Again, we're talking about 2 events that are going to happen in the future. Number 1, I'm going to play with the dog, and number 2, you're going to arrive. But this time, as opposed to when we looked at the future perfect tense, Now we're saying that at the point in time when you arrive, that other action, me playing with the dog, is going to be in progress. That's why we call this the progressive tense, or continuous. It's going to be continuously happening. To express that in German, you can switch to the simple present tense and add a time specifier. For example, wenn du ankommst, spiele ich schon eine Weile mit dem Hund. When you arrive, I play already for a while with the dog. That doesn't really work in English, but it works in German. But, let's look now at the last tense in English. This is the future perfect progressive, or future perfect continuous tense. This one bugs me. This one really bugs me, because I don't think it's possible to express this at all in German, at least not in a single sentence. And that bugs me because German is usually an expressive language. Anything you say in English, you can say in German. You might have to change the construct that you're using. You might have to switch to a different tense, but you can usually express an English sentence in German. But let me give you an example of a sentence that I think cannot be translated directly into German. If I'm wrong, please correct me in the comments below, because I'm dying to know. No sarcasm, I'm dying to know if you can say this in German in a single sentence. Here's the example in English. When you arrive, I will have been playing with the dog for a while now. Let's think about that. What does that mean? Again, we're talking about two things that are going to happen in the future. I'm going to play with the dog, and you're going to arrive. But now, let's look at it relative to the point in time when you arrive. That other action, me playing with the dog, is going to have started in the past, continued for a while also in the past, but continued up to and including that moment in time. It's still going to be happening at the point in time when you arrive. You cannot express that in German because will have been playing simply, there's no way to say that in German. The closest I can come in a single sentence is to switch that to Futur I, but that's technically wrong. Let's think about that. Wenn du ankommst, werde ich mit dem Hund gespielt haben. Gespielt haben means will have played. But that's wrong. Think about that. I'm saying that at the point in time when you arrive, I'll already be done playing with the dog. That's not what I said in English. In the English version of that sentence, I'm still playing with the dog at the point in time when you arrive. The only way I can think of to express that in German is to break it into multiple sentences. For example, ich werde mit dem Hund spielen. Und später, wenn du ankommst, werde ich noch mit dem Hund spielen. That is literally, I'm going to play with the dog, and later when you arrive, I'm still going to play with the dog. That's closer in meaning, but now it's more clunky. It takes more than one sentence to say that. I simply don't think you could translate that English sentence directly into German, and that really bugs me. Maybe more than it should. Okay, that brings us to the end of the future tenses in English and German. And that brings us to the end of the 3-video series on tense in the German language. But before we close out this video, let's do a recap and a summary of everything that we've learned, because we covered a lot of ground in these 3 episodes, and there's some important stuff in here. We covered Partitiv II. That is handy in all of the perfect tenses in German. And it is very good to know how to form Partitiv II. We covered the conjugation table in simple present tense, which is also very handy to know because you'll be using it in almost every single sentence you speak. We covered the difference between Haben and Sein for the auxiliary verb in the perfect tenses. This is an oddball concept compared to English, but it's very important to know it because you're going to be encountering it a lot. But arguably most important, we covered usage differences between the different tenses across the different languages. Yes, there are equivalents of most of the tenses, not all of them as we've seen, but most of them, but they're not always used the same. And specifically, I want to draw attention to the fact that the German present tenses are remarkably versatile compared to English. In fact, I'm going to go as far as to say, this might be controversial, but if you wanted to take a shortcut in your language learning efforts, you could just focus on the German present tenses. That is Präsens, simple present tense, and Perfekt, the present perfect tense. Because using those 2 tenses, you can talk about stuff in the past, you can talk about stuff in the present, and you can also express stuff in the future using the simple present tense and a time specifier. This means that arguably you don't need to worry so much about learning the German past tenses and the German future tenses. I mean, for the sake of completion and of mastering the language, yes, you should eventually learn them, but if you wanted to take a shortcut, you could focus entirely on the German present tenses. There's only 2 of them, and if you master those 2 tenses, you can express stuff in both past and present and future. Which is pretty neat when you think about it, because our English present tense is not nearly that versatile. And that concludes the 3 video series on tense in the German language. Was erwartet uns in der Zukunft? Niemand kann das wissen.